Hello, everybody. Slowly but surely, people are joining. We'll wait a few more minutes. Cool. Can we pin stuff in the chat? Because for the people that want to follow along, uh, you can follow these instructions. That's what you see on the left side of my screen.
Okay, I think we can pin it somehow.
Then we'll wait a few more minutes. I think in a minute or so, I'll start.
Yeah, I think we can wait until 12:03 for 2 more minutes for people to join. I already see around 29 people have already joined.
Perfect.
So yeah, we wait a couple more minutes and then we can start.
Maybe I'll drop the poll for everybody that's there, just for us to get a feel who's joining this call.
Yes, this would be nice.
And I launched the second poll. I guess I'll slowly start the introduction. So on our last webinar, well, we got a lot of positive responses, but we also got some responses that people just wanted to listen in. Actually, now I'm seeing in the poll that people just want to listen in, but we've set up this webinar in a way where if you want to, you can like follow along step by step. Obviously, if you don't want to, feel free to just listen in. We will share the recording with you afterwards. We will also, or you can take the HTML link with all the instructions and you can do this at home or at the office, wherever you want to do it. But the idea is that we will go step by step and you can actually, well, after HTML opened, I shared in the chat next to your terminal and can follow every single step to get to high quality evaluators and see how it is to work with org in combination with Claude Code or any other coding assistant and see how you will optimize your evals, because that is what this session is about. I think, Kuldeep, can I kick it off?
Yeah, I think we can kick it off. Just a quick one, Kira. I think your mic is a bit scratching on the shirt a bit. Yeah, I think this way should be better.
Is better?
Yeah, a lot better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Otherwise, I have a backup pair of headphones here. So,
Yeah.
should I use these actually?
Maybe if you want to change, yeah, you can change. Yeah.
Test.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, then I'll get started. No more scratching on the shirt. So welcome everybody. Amazing that you guys are joining the webinar again today during lunchtime. We know you guys probably, well, you can listen in while you eat your sandwich, but we're happy that you spent this hour with us. So this webinar is really about how you can automate your sort of observability and evaluator lifecycle using orq in combination with coding assistants like Claude Code. And just to set the stage a little bit, what I want to be clear about is that whenever you're building AI features or AI systems, and we've also spoken about that in the first webinar, in case there are people here who also joined the first webinar, it requires a lot of iteration before you hit high levels of quality. And there's, in a way, 2 iteration loops that your features go through. So on the left side here, you see there's the iteration you can do on your agent or on your deployment or on your agentic workflow. But obviously, if you use an LLM-as-a-Judge to measure the quality of that system, your evaluator is an AI feature in and of itself, and it needs to go through the same sort of life cycle. For this webinar, we'll solely focus on optimizing the evaluator. If you want, if you have time, if you have your Claude Code open, probably there will be suggestions done to also do improvements on the agent that you're building. But the webinar will be centered around this cycle, optimization of the evaluator. So I think it's pretty 50-50 in the webinar of the people who wanna co-build. For the people that do and who did not have the MCP installed yet or Claude Code installed, feel free to follow these instructions here on the left. I don't think we can pin it, but I dropped the HTML in the chat. So you guys can open that link and copy these instructions. Obviously, you do need to have an orq account. That's quite important. And for the ones that don't have the orq MCP installed yet, to find your API key, you need to go into here, AI Studio, organization, admin keys, and you can copy one of the keys here, ideally one that is not attached to a project, just to be sure. Also, there are some colleagues of mine in the chat that can support you if you run into any difficulties. So please do drop any relevant questions in the chat if you have difficulty installing the MCP. I guess one sort of free text question in the chat, if anybody wants to answer, what were the expectations that you had joining this webinar? What is it that you hoped to learn? Don't see any responses yet, but I'll continue. So for the people that do have the MCP installed, what you can run if you have your Claude open, like I do here on the right side, is you can copy this or you can just type it. How to integrate OpenTelemetry and Evals. Alessandro, I'll drop a link to the docs in a second. So you can run this command to quickly see, okay, what is actually happening in my workspace. If you have a new workspace, you won't see too much, but if you, let me see. We can also, continue here, I think. Yes. Here it's working. So this is what I see, a lot of agents in our workspace, a lot of deployments, a lot of prompts, and a lot of data sets. Alessandro, for you, I don't know if you have a specific framework you're using, but if you do, here is the relevant documentation to integrate observability using OTel, some of it very tailored, a very native integration with specific frameworks like LangGraph. So we trace that really nicely. So I hope that in the meantime, everybody mentioned or managed to set up the org MCP. If not, drop a comment in the chat. And then the next step, which is actually an important step, especially for the new users of org. Arjen, can you help us in the chat? So what is important if it's the first time in the AI Studio for you, you made your account yesterday or you made your account this morning. Here on the left side, we have the sidebar. And then here you have the AI router. So here you see all the different providers that we have available. For the ones that don't have their own provider keys enabled, you most likely have €1 of credit here on the balance, because that's what we give you if you make an account for the first time. Or what you can do if you want to be safe during the session and you want to run everything I will run today, you can integrate your providers here in the provider tab. You can configure, set up API key, and drop the relevant API key here. I've set up everything in such a way that you should be able to, well, complete this webinar with $1 worth of credit. And then what I want you to do, in the search bar, type in GPT, and then you see GPT 5.4 mini, and then make sure that it's toggled on. Or if there's any other models you really want to use during this webinar, I don't know, maybe one of the new Kimi models, you can also turn those on. For you to use them in this webinar or in general across the platform when you're using org, they need to be toggled on here. Another thing that might be useful to do and to follow along is, for most of you that have like a new workspace, there will be a default folder here at projects. But if you want to work in a more clean way, you can create a new project, call it webinar, call it whatever you like, by clicking this plus button here, because that's then where we will ask the MCP to create all the different entities. So if I'm going too fast, also please do let me know. But the first prompt we're going to run is this prompt to build the agent. Again, you can copy this prompt from the link that we shared and just drop it in your Claude Code. I will just specify it needs to store it in the folder I created, which is 0 webinar April. I still need to press number 2. Some of you probably have it enabled that it just executes. So as you can see, my agent is now created. For the ones that are curious, you can always, well, that's probably the fastest way if you build in the terminal, use the URL, and then you can actually see what the Agent Studio looks like in org. For the webinar, I've built a super simple single agent. For the ones that are feeling more creative, for the ones that have more than $1 of credit, for the ones that have their provider keys enabled or actually are on a paid plan during this webinar, feel free to make a far more complex agent than this one. I wanted to create a very simple one to make sure that people can follow with $1. So here you see very simple tools that are added to the agent: web search, current date, time, lightweight agent instructions, as specified in the prompt as well, very low levels of max turns and max execution time, again, mainly to reduce cost. And for the ones that want to make it extra advanced, if you want to ask your Claude Code to create something with the Jinja or the Moustache template, that's also possible. Everybody that wants to follow along is managing. Well, now that you've built your agent, we can go to step 3, which is invoking this agent. The reason why I wanted to start with this step 1 and step 2 and I wanted to create agents is because we speak to a lot of teams that have built agents already and that have traces already. Like Alessandro, they want to use OTel to trace their existing production system. So I sort of wanted to simulate that environment where you have an agent in production, you don't have any evaluators running on that agent, you have no idea what the quality of that system is. So that is sort of what we're synthesizing here. So feel free to run step 3. Because it's on the basis of the production data that we will start to define evaluators. And while we're waiting, for the ones that joined webinar 1, we spoke a lot about sort of all the different steps in the AI lifecycle and how you define quality, and that you need to define that pretty much in step 1, because how you define quality that translates to what evaluators you will build. But what I'm seeing, especially with teams that started building, is that lots of them have production systems without any evals, no idea what the system is good at, no idea what the system is bad at. So sometimes, because that it's the case, it's also good to do an analysis, which we will do in a sec, on production data, see where the weaknesses are, and build a stable evaluator upon that to then start monitoring that in production after you, for example, made a tweak to your production system or before. So now my agent has been invoked. Let's first, before we dive into the platform and before I show you where you can see your traces in org, for me, it already invoked, but for the ones perhaps where it didn't, you need to ask your Claude Code to run the script for you. For the ones where it was run correctly, you can go on to step 5 and analyze the recent traces of the agent that you've built. I also had some older traces from this agent in the workspace. And what makes this super, super powerful is that well, we are building out, or our team is building out lots of features to help you get insights from your traces, because obviously it's manually impossible to sift through hundreds of traces every single day to check the quality of your system. But what the orq MCP gives you in combination with coding assistance is that you can ask any type of question with any level of complexity, with any level of depth to your agents, to your production systems, to the things that you're tracing. So here you see a relatively granular analysis appearing. All traces from today. If you would have older ones, you can include it. The behavior of those traces, token consumption of those traces, time, average cost. If you want to retrieve specific traces, that is possible. If you want to add something that we call identities, I will drop it in the chat because I think it might be relevant for some of you. To your traces, that's possible. So what some of our clients do, they have something that is called identities, and it allows you to monitor exactly how your clients are using your AI features. So we have clients that are able to bill with nice margins the cost that they're making to support their clients with AI features. All of these things are possible to attach to the trace and to then query via the MCP. So you can go very, very granular. And if anybody has any questions or suggestions on how or what they would like to query on the trace, drop that in the chat as well. So the failure taxonomy that was retrieved, indeed, before I updated the prompt, which I did this morning, a lot of Google searches were executed, sometimes so many that it became very expensive and very, very slow because we had way higher max iteration. We had no limitations on it in the prompt. Here we even see no output returned. And here we see post-update vague hedged answers. That is due to the fact that I now reduced the amount of Google searches. So it's a lot more lightweight type of information it can pull in. Initially, I also had a scraper attached. Then you won't have as many vague or lightweight answers. But again, you consume a lot more tokens. So, well, this is all the weighing I guess you guys also need to do when building features. Well, single hard failures. And then what's working well. As you can see here, it's already doing suggestions to improve your agents. Feel free to include that, but because we're in this session focusing on optimizing the evaluator, I will go to step 6 and ask it to build an evaluator from the dominant failure mode, an LLM as a judge. And the reason to work like this is because, okay, you have your production system, you might have your agent in orq, or you might have your agent in LangGraph or in Vercel. You started tracing it. You have no idea where it's good. You have no idea where it's bad. You asked your Claude or your other coding assistant to do that initial analysis. To see where the weaknesses are, but maybe you had actually very little historical data that it found these weaknesses on. So that would be a reason to first develop an eval to check, okay, indeed, if we start measuring over a week time and over several hundreds of traces, do we see the same pattern occurring before you make an adjustment? But obviously you can also make an adjustment straight away and then add an eval. So this is what happens with Claude Code. It now already attached it to my agent, which was not necessarily the case, like the requirement. But what is also important for you guys to know, and I'll show you guys in the UI, you can set sample rates on evals. So if you have agents running that get invoked millions of times every month, or maybe even more, you might not want to have an evaluator running on every single invocation, because obviously that costs you money if that's an LLM-as-a-Judge. So you might only want it to run 30% of the times. So you can set that sample rate a lot lower. Thanks, Oz, for the suggestion. And thanks for checking it in the studio. It's noted down. I think the team is working on fixing this. So to take it quickly back to the studio, if you open the org platform as well, and you go into the sidebar here, you see traces. I have traces v3 on. You might have this toggle on traces v2, but here you see all the new traces coming in across your workspace. So if we go in here, and then indeed, as was mentioned, we had to do a hard refresh. You can also go into your agent that you've built, maybe a simple research agent like mine, and here you can find the specific traces for this agent. So here you can find the duration, the tokens that were consumed, the cost, also split across input and output tokens. And if you want to have a more granular view of what happened, you can open the trace, and here you see exactly which steps were kicked off. If you simply want to have a look at what was actually asked to your agent, then you can open the thread view. And then here you can see the simple system message that we had, the actual user message, which city was just announced as the host of the 2036 Summer Olympics. Well, correctly executed first current date, and then the tool call. And here you see exactly with which parameters it was executed, what was being returned, everything that was being retrieved, and then the final assistant message, including sources. So this is what all our teams use to debug their systems, to check on the most granular level. But if you want to have these high over insights, I would say there's no better way to ask your specific questions than to ask them here to the MCP. So now that we've created an evaluator, we will create in step 7 a data set to test the quality of this evaluator on. So you can copy this one and drop it. The same folder. Yeah, Google Search is a built-in org tool, so you get that one off the shelf. Same with Web Scrape. I'll show you in a second in the UI where you can see the tool library in the Agent Studio. But you can probably also ask the MCP, like, what are all the tools that are available? So now we create a synthetic data set, obviously just for the speed, and because we only have 1 hour to do this exercise. But data set curation is one of the most important steps if you are sort of testing the quality of your AI system or testing the quality of your eval. So you need to make sure that your data set is what we call balanced, so that it includes, and I also mentioned this during the first webinar we ever hosted, like it includes all the type of input queries that you expect your clients or users to have a lot, but it also should include some of the edge cases that might occur more than once. It should have some difficult examples, some examples that are edge cases, because obviously if that is the data set that will form the basis to measure quality, it needs to be as representative as possible of your production data. So especially for the people in this call who do have a paid org workspace, or who do have either historical data that they can use from other systems, or who have historical production traces already, also with Claude Code, try to curate a data set that is either fully based on real production data or is a synthesized version of your production data, because nothing is more valuable than what is happening to your system in production. And again, here a summary of the data set that was created. So we had 12 pass, 12 fail. I don't think this pass fail, we now created a Boolean evaluator, because it's we always recommend for the people that build evaluators for the first time, start out with building high quality Boolean evaluators, because it's harder to build high quality categorical or high quality numeric evaluators, because these models are biased. It doesn't have to be 50-50 in terms of output. Again, I think there it should also sort of resemble what your production data looks like. A lot of sort of classic data science ML best practices also hold in the space of Gen AI. So this data set will now form the basis to run our baseline experiment. If we go here to 8, we can copy, and I'll just continue, guys, but please do drop questions in the chat if you want to follow along, but you're stuck somewhere in an earlier step. Okay, while we run this experiment, I'll quickly show you guys where you can find the tool library in the UI. If you are in the studio, so you're in your agents, in your folder, which you can open, by the way, using these arrows. Here on the left side, you see Add Tool. You can click this, and then here you can see all the built-in tools. So we still have Web Scraper left that we could add. We have 2 built-in tools for a feature that we have called memory stores. And these are all the other different tools that we have available. So we have function tools, HTTP tools, Python tools, agents, in the case you're building a multi-agent system, and obviously MCPs as well. I think what is very nice actually about the way we build agents is that if you, let me quickly approve this one. If you connect your MCP tool based on the remote server URL to org, you have the decision to not add all tools that get unlocked by the MCP, but the specific ones that you need to, again, sort of control context, control cognitive load on your agent. So here, if you open your folder, you see all the different entities that were created. This is what the experiment dataset or the dataset of the evaluator looks like. So here we have the query. Here we have the response. And here we have the expected outputs. So I think, Arjen, you can probably answer this question best in what we cover in the synthetic data sets skill or command. I would say also wherever we can, we do try to integrate best practices so that we know our clients do not have to rely on, well, their knowledge that they might have or might not have. Okay. So now that we ran the experiment, we are getting the first results. And actually, as with some AI systems, for most of the people in this call who've tried to build stuff, overall accuracy is not that great, actually, on this evaluator. So it's only scoring on accuracy 14 out of 24, 58.3%, so slightly better than random in the case of, well, outputting a Boolean value. It's a lot better at detecting true negatives than it is at detecting true positives. And it's giving us some additional information. Then here, I will now ask it, which is not part of the steps, but it should do this automatically. Oh, wait. Some rows were empty. Because of max tokens. So let me ask it to run an improved experiment with all these suggestions, also with increased max tokens. So I think this is now what I type. So to pretty much integrate these suggestions, both in terms of parameter configuration, so in this case, max tokens, but also adding a few shot examples, chain of thought, all that sort of stuff. But I believe that should also be here in step 10. Also, I think the 429, I think you are probably on a developer plan. Because we have rate limits on the developer plan, which we lifted for this webinar. I think you're hitting those, unfortunately. Because I thought we lifted them for all, but maybe just for the new ones. Thank you, Arjen. the other thing, but yeah, for that we couldn't prevent, is that if people were co-building with us during this session on the $1 and they're using our, well, then they're using our API keys, that if everybody's running an experiment at the same time, we might run into the rate limitations of the model providers on our keys. So while this one is running, I'll quickly show you, well, the example that I ran yesterday on the same agent, which resulted in a different eval. So here, a data set similar to the previous one, queries, random queries to do research on how does Cloudflare R2's object storage compare to AWS S3, compare Datadog versus Grafana Cloud, and actual evaluator prompts. So a strict binary evaluator of response depth and specificity was the evaluator that was made yesterday. Pause if the response is specific and decision useful, including concrete details such as named entities, numbers, metrics, pricing dates, clear differentiators, or trade-offs. And then here, the variables were mapped. So the query and the actual response. And then here, the actual expected output for the evaluator. So the evaluator is focusing on response depth. And I think what was very nice about yesterday's example is that initially it had a 75% accuracy score. And after I ran the improvements, it went to 100%, which is obviously very high. I think as the complexity of your data set and the size of your data set increases, you might not hit 100, but you're able to get close to it. And you see the difference in cost. So we did triple the price by the changes that we made. So for the ones that do have an experiment that ran after the improvements they made with columns, what you guys can do is you can open that URL. That should be, let me see if mine is also still busy. So yours might also still be busy, but when it's done, it will give a URL and you can open that URL, or you can go into the Org Studio in your folder. It will probably be there. Yeah, probably this one is overfitting. But, and then we're sort of going into the final step. That's why we have the review screen, and we always urge all of our clients to do checks, manual checks with your human eyeballs to see if you agree with the judgments of your AI system. So for the people who have an experiment that is ready, go into the studio, open the review screen here at the top, open the compare. And then here on the left side, you see inputs. For row 1, you see the query that I just mentioned and the full response of the research agent and the expected pass or fail of the response depth evaluator. So according to this evaluator on our now synthetically annotated data set, this should be a pass. This answer is deep enough. And then here what we can see is that both assistants passed, but maybe when you read this, you're like, this is not deep enough. This should be a fail. So here at the bottom, we have a human annotation column, fail. and this is correct. This is a pass. How do you create human annotation so that you can pretty much do this check on every single column? To create human annotations, you need to go into your folder where you're making the experiment. This currently happens from the studio. And you need to click Settings, and you need to add a human review. And then you can give it a name. You can give it a description, make something categorical, like pass or fail. Add that sentiment as well. Or if you want to, you can create a range to grade it. Or if you want to, you can create free text. So you need to go into your project folder, into settings, and then create the human review there. Did everybody's experiment run, or are people running into rate limits and other issues? So since my experiment is also still running, just to look at my old example, if you open here the system prompt, you see the changes that were made between the first and the second iteration of the evaluator prompt. So here on the left side was the one that I just read out loud. Very simple response depth prompt to, well, pretty much which forms the basis of this response depth evaluator. And then after the improvements, it added a lot more, well, depth to it. So far more specific. Pass means the response is specific. It contains most of the following named entities, concrete numbers, clear differentiators, source URLs, or named references for factual claims. Okay, that's something we need to check. Thanks, Os, for mentioning it. A response can be long and detailed and still pass. Length is not a penalty. A thorough, evidence-rich response with specific data points is a pass, even when it covers many subtopics. So again, this is the reason why you need to check your experiment manually, because you might not agree with this statement. You might want to actually penalize for long responses, because long responses can contain a lot of irrelevant information. Fail means that the response is generic, vague, shallow overall, signs of fail, and then specific reasons. And then last but not least, obviously few-shot prompting, probably something some of you have heard multiple times up until now, that it really improves the quality of your system, whether that's a single LLM call, whether that's eval, that's still the case. Obviously, in the selection of the few-shot prompts that you attach to your evaluator, you also need to be critical. Ideally, that set is also balanced, so you don't have 5 examples that all pass or 5 examples that all fail. You also have different levels of complexity in those examples. So here you could go through all these different examples and have a look at, like, this is less relevant, but when you look at the actual response for this one, whether you think it is actually a fail or whether it's a pass. So here you see the very small and lightweight evaluator thinks this response is not deep enough. The comparison doesn't go deep enough. Whereas here, this evaluator with a more complex prompt did decide that this is a pass and this is deep enough and complex enough and detailed enough. So here you can say that you agree with this evaluator, pass, enough depth to this response, nothing missing. Here it can be that you agree. So here it says false. Maybe you indeed find this a fail. And also for this one, you find it a fail. All of this also becomes visible here as a column, similar to a normal evaluator. And this information can also be queried again from the MCP. So if I now, what's the exact name of this one? Hey, my experiment is also still running. Well, yeah, we took a big risk by doing this, I guess, building session. I did multiple dry runs. Let me stop this. So I hope for some of the people in the call, the experiment did execute fully and correctly. But given the time, I now want to take you guys to step 11, which is a very important step. It's the most laborious step. We now did, a very lightweight version of it. I just pretty much annotated only 4 rows. We want to do an analysis of this annotation. And then I'll copy this. So if you actually go through this exercise and not only sort of state whether you agree or disagree with what the eval outputted, but also give your reasoning of why you disagree or why you agree, you give the system very valuable information to further improve your evaluator. Okay. So for some reason, the prompt that did work yesterday, if you guys have an experiment that was executed and you managed to create a human annotation and add it to your experiment, I'll drop this in the chat. So obviously, these numbers are not as insightful because I only annotated a few rows. And there's far more cells pending because we had 2 evaluator columns, an old one and a new one, across 24 rows. So in total, 48 cells in a way, of which only 4 were annotated. So this is exactly sort of where you also can do inter-annotator agreement if you want to take it to the next level. So you can have, for example, me doing an annotation on an experiment, one of your colleagues doing an annotation on an experiment, whether that's an evaluator or whether that's a feature. Yes, also just answer your question. It does. So you can you can add your production traces with all their complexity straight into a data set. Inter-annotator agreement, as I mentioned, when you do this exercise. And what I also said earlier, if you also add comments on the annotated or the categorical labels you leave behind in that experiment, that can again be absorbed by your coding assistant and be pushed into your evaluator or in your agent to improve it. Here it also gives you insights that some things might be mislabeled in your data set. So it also services issues you might have in your data set. So this is very, very powerful. And then here, lastly, some key takeaways that we also mentioned. So obviously you need to annotate way more rows if you want to get, well, the value from it. Two data sets labels might be wrong. Your LLM-as-a-Judge might be too strict, and no V2 annotations yet. So in the case of this example that I ran yesterday, so the response depth evaluator that I brought from 75% to 100, you might be, so now it's overfitting, but let's say it would be 95. I did the annotation exercise. I actually saw myself that this evaluator seems to have very stable and very correct behavior. Then you want to add this to your production system. And that's the last prompt here at 12. I think I saw Claude Code attach it to the agent earlier already, but this is sort of one full iteration cycle we went through in this webinar now. And now the moment it is actually attached to your agent with a 100% sample rate or a 30% sample rate, you can start measuring your evaluator directly on production data to see if it comes back continuously, or maybe if you've updated your agent, you also prevent the problem from reoccurring, which you're now measuring with a stable evaluator. That's the most important thing. That is the main takeaway from this webinar, is that anybody who's using LLMs as a judge to measure the performance of their systems, you need to know how stable your LLM as a judge is, just because, again, you're working with AI. And the way to know the stability of your evaluator is to go through the cycle we went through today, and to go through these iterations and to go through them continuously. So as all said, also your data set is a living entity, you know? So as you get new production traces in from your system, add them to a data set. We also have a special feature for that called automations, if you don't want to do it using your MCP, and kick off experiments on that evaluator. I think I also promised it in webinar 1, but we have clients who have things like this running in their CI/CD directly. We need to do a separate webinar on how to set that up, but I wanted to show you guys the process of combining orq together with the MCP and how you can automate some of this work for you. So I guess with the 2 minutes that are left, anybody that has any questions that are still pending? Then I'll guess before you guys all drop off, I'll make one final poll. And please, whether it's a yes or whether it's a no, whether you think this session was useful or not, please drop the reasons in the comment, because we're still iterating and trying to mix up the webinars and the formats to make it fun for you guys to follow, especially during your valuable lunchtime. So thank you all for joining, and I hope it was useful and some of you could co-build. And if you have any feedback, we would love to hear it, both on the webinar as well as on the platform. And then for the ones that didn't build during this session, yes, we'll share the recording. I will also put the HTML link live. So with all the adjustments and improvement suggestions from our engaged webinar joiners. So you can do this at home, or you can show this to your colleagues or send it over, this flow. Okay, I'll stay for a few minutes longer if anybody has any specific questions. Then I think we can close it off if there's no more questions. Thank you all